Hey guys, welcome back to City Skylines. This is one of my favorite episodes in this series since I'll be working on a theme park. It's not going to be anything big, it's gonna be a pretty small sort of local theme park kind of idea, especially considering that at the time when this was recorded, which is quite a while ago now, there weren't too many assets to make theme parks with, and I was kind of in doubt whether I should really try it, but it really just felt like something that should be doable pretty well in this game, and just something I've been wanting to try for such a really long time that I really wanted to give it a shot here. And the basic idea for the theme park is pretty simple. I think you can generally just sort of divide theme parks into two main categories. There are the really large pre-planned parks that are laid out at once, like the Disney parks, which are all very much planned beforehand and all just built in one go. And then there are the more sort of family run or growing over time kind of theme parks that start out as smaller playgrounds or something like that, and only over time get more attractions and develop into larger theme parks. And it's sort of in the latter category that I think this one fits into. It definitely doesn't have the sort of Disney layout. I didn't feel it would be really doable with the things that we have. It's much more doable, I think, to just go for something that's a little bit more random, a little bit smaller and on a smaller scale as well, and less heavily themed. Just go for something in which you can kind of just plop the assets in and create a fun little theme park. And starting off with the park, I wanted to have a main street, which is more of a Disney thing, but this park was inspired by a park in the Netherlands that you might know if you're Dutch. It's called Waliharendoornrellingland. It's not a particularly big theme park, it's not very famous, and it definitely doesn't have the best reputation. But it's just a pretty small, nice theme park that I figured I could make something similar to it, just with different attractions and different themes and different layouts, but a similar sort of idea and size to it. So I wanted to start off with a main street over here, much like Waliharendoornrellingland, which also has a small main street. And the most doable theme, since I did want to make this a theme park with an actual theme, I figured would actually be to go with a Dutch theme, which is not just kind of fits the general Dutch theme of this city, honestly, but it also felt like the most doable thing here, and also the most, well, from a realistic standpoint, this is in the Netherlands, and having a theme park that's themed after the Netherlands itself would be a pretty cool thing to have. So just having a standard sort of small main street, which can have some restaurants and entry sort of services in it, with a Ferris wheel at the end, which isn't too big, but does make a really nice entry into the park with something big at the end of the streets. And on both sides of the main street, I sort of divided the park into two different parts and tried to have one sort of central area with both of these parts, and sort of divide the attractions equally throughout these parts. So I wanted to get this right side in with just a couple of buildings and a beer garden, just to be able to get a restaurant in and make that plaza in front of it using the concrete textures. I'll cover up the roads later. I had to have some functional roads, and I just went for the gravel roads in the end, but you're not going to end up seeing those. I just needed to have the functional roads to actually be able to place assets alongside it, of course, and they do kind of generally mark off the general layout of the paths in the park. But yeah, so basically this area is just going to have that sort of central plaza with the beer garden and the drop tower, and down here I just wanted to have one of these more very quiet rest areas in the park with some toilets and picnic tables and just a general place where you can just kind of relax in the park and not have any thrilling experiences or anything like that. And since coasters are often tucked in the corners and the sides of the theme parks, I wanted to have one of the wooden roller coasters in that side there. I think, no, that's actually the only wooden roller coaster we had at this point in time, I think. Which I do have to say, some of the roller coasters are just definitely far from realistic and don't actually have any kind of lift or anything like that that makes sense. I am just trying to sort of get the general look of the theme park, but not get it 100%, because definitely when it comes to the attractions, mostly the roller coasters, there's no way to get it exactly realistic. Now moving on, I also wanted to have a bit of a fancy area over here and place a cinema over there, which if you haven't played Roller Coaster Tycoon, in the original Roller Coaster Tycoon and Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, there was a 3D cinema which looked like this. So there's a lot of nostalgia involved probably in me placing that, but I really figured it would be a nice way to get something in that corner of the park. And since it was on the Steam Workshop, I really figured I couldn't not place that in the park, since it's just, well, such a big, well, classic within the theme park games. And for realism purposes, I did want to make the plot in which this theme park is located, like, just a square within all the farm fields that I'll have, so it also will fit within the grid of the way that the farm fields are divided. And I basically didn't want to have a sort of scattered around plot shape or a very round looking park, since that just wouldn't make sense. And this also left some room at the end, especially the edges of the park here, to leave some space open for services, for staff or maintenance or storage, things like that. So I did want to keep this open and place a couple of those buildings on the side here, just to be able to have some sort of backstage areas that the guests can't actually go to, but they are mostly just meant for staff and doing all sorts of things which a theme park needs, but you don't actually want to see as a guest. And in the other corner, and that right there is the corner next to the highway, so I figured that's where we, well, basically want to have the biggest roller coaster, because we kind of want to show off the park over there. So I placed the biggest roller coaster right over there near the Dogbone interchange, and that's basically this park's dig measuring contest right there, and have a little path around it just to mark off what the edge of the park is. There is still room for one more coaster, I figured, which I'll put in the other edge on the other side, but aside from that I also didn't want to clog it up too much and leave some areas open, while at the same time not making the park too big, since this is more of a like local small theme park. So I figured a nice way to fill in the area over here is to add a little pond-like area next to the greenhouse, which isn't entirely a theme park kind of attraction, I should say. I was hoping to get something else in there, but at the time there weren't any other theme park rides. I know there's definitely more now, which are quite a bit better as well, but at the time this was more or less everything, and I also didn't want to leave it empty, which is why I figured it would be nice to have the greenhouse there and put a little garden in front of it. And there at the edge I wanted to have the final roller coaster, since it is a pretty small roller coaster and it fits pretty neatly in there. And there's still even a bit of space left for a nice little playground in the future. So I'll be filling that up a bit as well. And I also did want to scatter a few restaurants and picnic places in around here as well. So this is supposedly a small restaurant where people can just sit over here and watch the coaster, stuff like that. I figured for a park this size it would make sense to have just about 2 main restaurants, aside from the small stalls and little shops that are just pretty much plopped throughout the park. Just have 2 main large restaurants that people can eat at, which seems pretty reasonable for a park of this size. And yeah, that's basically the sort of approach to the services in this park. Now here I finally cover up the paths, which is pretty similar to real-life theme parks. Real-life theme parks do have very boring paths in terms of their textures. It's mostly just concrete, big slabs of concrete just about everywhere, but there are sometimes interesting patterns and some general ways that the paths are laid out. And over here I figured I more or less had to do it this way, since I well, didn't have any path texture of the concrete texture that you can actually lay over roads, and at the time I also didn't have any concrete roads, because I still need to use the first Traffic++ in order to actually run this park, since I started the park, or the city with it. But yeah, Traffic++ doesn't really work well anymore, so I'm kind of stuck with that, and I can't use any concrete roads. So this more or less seemed like the next best thing, and since it did end up becoming quite a big concrete desert over here, and I did want to make it look a little bit more charming than that, I figured a good way to get more foliage into the park would be just to put some extra planters here and there, and put some trees in that, and basically make sure that there aren't any sort of really big, vast concrete areas, without making sure that there are just a few trees here and there as well. And the biggest backstage area is over here, so I figured this would be the most important place for storage and maintenance and things like that. Right there, which also has a pretty good connection to the rest of the park without being too obvious of a connection or too accessible for, well, the regular guests really. So that just felt like a good way to fill in the plots, so I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. It also doesn't look too square, like I wanted to place the park within that very square plot shape, but I didn't want the park itself to be too much bordered by that and be all around the edges everywhere, so I don't think you notice the outsides of the park too much when you're within the park itself, because you do kind of try to hide the outside when you're in the park itself. And just have a few very simple garden elements around this part. Since it is pretty open and empty, I didn't want to make it a forest, especially since there is this nice symmetrical path thing that the greenhouse is going at the moment, so I didn't want to turn this into a very low sort of park where you could still be able to see the greenhouse from the other side, which also means that you kind of have two main things that sort of draw attention on both sides of the park, having the greenhouse and having the drop tower on the other side, and of course having the Ferris wheel at the end of the main street, which is also really visible sort of icon for the park. So yeah, that was just a pretty simple garden right there, and just for realism purposes I also wanted to of course dress it up a bit with path elements, so adding some extra planters and some benches around the area just to make sure that people can sit around everywhere, and just also to make sure that the paths aren't that empty, because it's really easy for these very big slabs of concrete everywhere to just become this empty, boring desert of paths, and that's something I really wanted to try and avoid in this case. Even though you barely actually notice me placing all the benches and things like that in a time-lapse, I also wanted to place some lanterns, obviously just to set the mood a bit, but also to light up the park, and that is basically the theme park itself. Now on the other side, and this is very much just ripped off from Slaghade, though it's a pretty common thing, it's also very much like the parking lots in front of Phantasialand in Germany. I wanted to have the parking lots across this regional road over here, which already does get a lot of traffic, which is kind of awkward, but it's just about dealing with it well enough that I figured this was safe to do. Have a small bridge over the road just for pedestrians so you don't get trouble with that, because it is a pretty busy road. And basically the parking lot itself is very simple, obviously. I wanted to have the bus stops very close to the entrance, so that's why there's the smaller concrete slab alongside the road. Then I also wanted to have the bus parking lots next to that, and only after that actually have the parking lots for cars, which might seem a little bit small. I've gotten some comments that this might be a bit of a small parking lot, but I kind of compared it with the parking lots of similarly scaled parks in the Netherlands, and it feels pretty safe to go for this size. There aren't that many people that only use cars, because public transport is pretty decent, though you'll probably never hear a Dutchman actually say that in the Netherlands. But yeah, it's pretty decent and very commonly used, so I felt pretty safe just going with a parking lot like this, which is not that big, and just dress it up a little bit, though it still was a parking lot, so I didn't want to make it too fancy and make it too nice, because that just, well, wouldn't really fit with the idea of it being a parking lot, obviously. And just to make it fit in the general area, though I haven't completely filmed all of this, since it is much of the same of the last couple of episodes, I also wanted to dress up the area around the theme park and make sure that all the polders around it look kind of realistic, and that the grid which the theme park plot has is also kind of continued in the farm plots, because you do kind of want it to look as if, like, over the years that the theme park developed, it just bought plots from farmers around it, so the overall shape of the park kind of does conform to the shapes of the farm plots around it. And hell, it might actually be able to expand in some point in the future, like buy some more plots around it and be able to actually make the park a bit bigger, especially behind the Ferris wheel, but that's just kind of stuff I wanted to think about and just leave in there. But I definitely won't expand the park myself. Just a bit more backstage stuff on the other side, and a parking lot for the staff as well. just so they don't have to go to the busy visitor parking lots. And some trees around here, obviously, to make the park not stand out as much. And since the space between the highway and the park couldn't really be used for anything, I did want to fill those spaces with just quite a few trees, not leave them just empty. It also kind of gives the theme park a bit of a mystery feeling around it, since it is, like, the entire park is surrounded by foliage, be it trees or bushes or hedges on all sides, and you can't really see it from the outside, and you don't really see the outside world from the theme park either, but you do notice, like, the drop tower and the really tall coaster that's next to the highway, when you're on the highway or when you're on the regional road, which does sort of draw you into the park. And skipping forward in the time-lapse, this is what it more or less ended up looking like. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out and how it fits in the environment as well. Definitely one of my favorite and most fun things to do as well, of the city in general. So yeah, that's it for this episode. A couple of things I do want to say about the future. I don't think I'll continue much with the city, but my plan still is to make one last episode in this series to make sure that this city is basically just finished. I might not turn it into an episode and just do a live stream of it. Still kind of need to announce that a bit. But I do want to still get around to at least, not completely finish this, but make it presentable. And after that, I will definitely make one final sort of cinematic video to show off what the city looks like. Anyway, that's it for this video, so thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys either in the next video or in the final one.